All right. So I'm going to talk about the delivery phase today, as the last phase of our design process. We have 3 different models of the design process we've been talking about. This is one of them, where we talked about our project identification, specification development, which if I had an ideal world, I would like to recreate this diagram so that this is like half of the circle, because this is the most important and should take the most time. Then conceptual design, where you brainstorm ideas and do your decision matrix. Detailed design, where you're coming up with drawings, bill of materials, and that kind of stuff. And now we're going to talk about the delivery and surface and maintenance phases. Or looking at this model, we did define, identify, brainstorm, select, and prototype. And now we're working on testing, iterate, and communicate. Or the dip and pick model, where we've defined, did our ideation, plan, and prototype, and now we're in iterate and communicate part of the process. Looking at the delivery phase, specifically, the goal here is that we're trying to refine that detailed design that we've created and come up with a product that's ready to give to our customer. So we're preparing it. We're in the final phase of trying to get it to our customer. To do this, these are some of the main tasks that we have to do. One is we need to create an instruction manual or a service and training manual. We also need to complete usability and reliability testing and then do a delivery review. Let's talk about a few of these in detail. I'm actually doing it kind of out of order. So talk about usability and reliability testing. One of the ways we look at this is through DFMEA, or Design for Failure Mode and Effect Analysis. There's going to be lots of letters going on today. DFMEA is a step-by-step approach that we use to analyze all the possible ways that our product can fail. And you have to think outside the box, because there's a lot of ways things can fail that you might not think about. The reason we do this is, the number one is we want to prevent injury. We don't want our product to hurt anyone or kill anyone, you know? So prevent injury. We also don't want it to fail. We would prefer if our product didn't fail. And then also reducing business risk. We're not creating any businesses with the products we're doing in this class, but if you go and work in industry, that's something you'll have to consider. When do we do this? We do it throughout the design phase, early and often, so you should be thinking about failure modes all the time. And then if you have a process change at your company, like you've changed what machine is going to make your product, you'll want to do a DFMEA at that point to see if there's new failures that you need to consider. And then anytime, honestly, you should be doing this routinely throughout your career to analyze existing products that are out there. This is very detailed, so we're going to talk about this step by step. The first thing we need to do, you're going to be creating a new table, okay? So we do lots of different tables. It's a great way to organize your thoughts. The first thing we need to do for all of our products, and this is something that many of you have probably already done, is functional decomposition. So you break your products down into different functions. So that's what this column is. We have our function. This is an example of an ATM, so a cash machine. The main function of our ATM is to dispense the amount of cash that was requested by the customer. That's our function. So then we need to brainstorm ways that we could fail at that function. How could we fail at that function? It doesn't dispense the cash. It dispenses too much cash, or it takes too long to dispense the cash. Those are 3 ways that it could fail at dispensing the cash. Next, we have to consider what will happen because of that failure. What is the effect? Are customers dissatisfied if they don't get their cash? We would have incorrect entry on our deposit system, or there's a discrepancy in our cash balancing at the end of the day. So these are all effects on not dispensing the cash. Or the bank loses money if we dispense too much cash. Or again, there's a discrepancy in our balances. So thinking about the effects of that failure. Then, as part of that, we're engineers, so we're going to do numbers. We're going to analyze how bad we think that is. So severity. How serious are the consequences? That's our S. Our S column. How severe is this consequence? We deemed that not dispensing the cash is an 8 out of 10. So it's pretty severe for the case of an ATM. If it dispenses too much, it's a 6. And if it takes too long, it's only a 3. So annoying our customer is a lot less severe than not giving them their money overall, right? So we give it a numerical value, S. Then we brainstorm the potential causes of that failure. Why did this happen? Well, maybe our machine was out of cash, or it was jammed, or there was a power outage. So brainstorming different ways that we think that this could happen is important as well. Then we give it a numerical value. This is our occurrence. Oh, how likely is this to happen? How likely is it that our machine is out of cash? We gave that a 5. How likely is it that the machine will jam? We gave that a 3. How likely is it that we have a power failure during the transaction? We gave that a 2. Then, the last column, which is a little bit harder to understand sometimes, but what are the current controls we have to prevent that? Or detection. How likely are we to catch it before that happens? Do we have some sort of detection system, or D? So do we have an internal low cache alert? Or internal jam alert? Or do we have nothing? Because we have nothing that will detect if there's going to be a power failure. It's kind of hard to predict, right? Then we give that a number as well. On a scale from 0 to 10, how likely are we able to catch it? 5, 10, 10. Then, to get our risk priority number, or RPN, we multiply these 3 columns. Our severity, our occurrence, and our detection. We get our RPN. This gives us a rank ordering of these failure modes. Then the last one is to identify those which are most critical. And this is just where we multiply S times O, ignoring the detection part. So how critical is it that we have, or that we identify those failures? So we're going to break into groups, and we're going to just do an activity on practicing this. And we're going to break up into groups that you're not always working with all the time anymore. So who you guys are going to analyze a webcam. So I'm going to give you 10 minutes to do an FMEA, DFMEA, the process we just talked about, for the product that I assigned to you. I'll go back to that table in a minute after I assign you your products. The first thing you'll want to do is break your product down into its functions, and then brainstorm its possible failures, and then go on from there. But those are the 2 main things you want to do first. Determine the functions, and then brainstorm its possible failure modes. Let's work on this. Who has the Hydro Jetpack? You guys. What failures did you identify? Possible failures.
We talked about just like the pump not working and it failing to reject water probably. When we talked about like the bindings breaking with the strap on, or like if it was on your feet or whatever.
Okay. Nothing. He was like, are we talking about the right thing? Yeah, go ahead. Anything else?
Yeah, and then like the tether, like the water line possibly breaking too.
Okay. Anything else? Can anyone else think of any other failures for a Hydro Jetpack? Okay. So let's see if you identified this one.
Here at the San Diego Yacht and Boat Show. Good morning, everybody. I'm hanging out with my friend John. Fox 5 Morning News starts. Look over there. And it starts right now.
It's your all of San Diego. This is your Fox 5 News.
I think you would call that maybe loss of control. I'm not sure.
Oh my God!
So those of you who are wondering what that is, that's a Hydro Jetpack.
What is that? Can someone please tell me what's going on?
Remember last week, Tony Parker of the Spurs was on vacation and he was renting
Yes! That's what he was renting.
So what would you call that? Lack of control, maybe? That failure? All right, let's see what's next. Canoe. What did you guys identify?
It needs to be balanced, otherwise someone can tip over. Pole, lost paddle, or termites.
Oh, termites. Wow, I haven't had anyone identify that one yet. Okay, anything else? Anyone else think of a way that a canoe could fail?
Oh, maybe mold, I guess.
Mold. What about being hit by a whale? All right, that one's not as funny, but that'd be kind of scary out in the middle of the ocean, get knocked over by a whale. Better than a shark, indeed. All right, next is webcam. What did you guys identify?
Flashlight is not working, lens is broken, poor quality, loading time is too long, customer is dissatisfied with the brand.
Okay, anything else?
Working without permission.
Okay, no permissions.
Stop working.
Stop working. Anyone else?
California travel tip number 97. Keep an eye on them at all times.
Hold on. Okay.
I don't hear it clicking, do you? Do you hear it clicking? No. And that's something wrong. We're doing something wrong. Here it is. Oh, we gotta wait. Here. 16, 15, 14, 13. Here, get closer.
This is my favorite.
Did you hear it click? Did you hear it click? Huh? I don't know. Oh, now, did you hear it click now? No.
No. All right, so what's the failure here?
No indication whether the camera is
What?
There's no indication if the camera is working or like a sound sensor.
Right, there's no indication as to whether it's working or not, which is important. It's kind of a user error, but I mean, you guys have been around since webcams have been invented your entire lives. That's not true for all of us. So back in the old days, we had to set a timer on the camera, go like count, and then hear a click, and we knew it took. So that's what these folks are waiting for, but they're not getting that because it's a webcam. So either having some sort of indicator or an instruction manual telling them that they don't need to wait, or it's always working, something like that. So it's a user error. Next is car wash.
So you could drive off or like not get in the track system or like drive out of it. The rollers can stop moving the cars and they can pile up. It could be out of soap, out of water. The brushes could come and take off a mirror or damage your car. And then like drying your car, it could have no air to dry it off, or it could be too hot and melt the paint, mess up the paint. And then there could be like a crash or cars, traffic jam.
There's a lot of ways that a car wash can fail, but you did not describe this one. User error, leaving the trunk open. The video doesn't work for this one, but this is, you can get it from the picture. So that's another user error. So something you do need to identify when you're doing these failure modes is the user error. And the last one, smartphone. What did you guys come up with?
No service in smartphone.
No service?
Dropping the phone.
Dropping?
Power.
Power? Okay. Here are a few different ways that you can get failures with smartphones. I like to start about here. Oh, so embarrassing. There's a couple more. User errors, you guys. Is there something we could implement into the smartphone to prevent this from happening? Another fountain. Ah. Another one, that one's kind of preventable. So you could maybe create some sort of sensor that's detecting if you are, I don't know, looking at your phone so that you have some sort of warning or something like that. I think there's a way that we could help prevent that. This one might not, I don't know. Oh, that's an expensive dog. And it just goes on for another 3 minutes of him chewing on the phone. So kind of the theme here is there are things that we need to think of outside of just the regular stuff that we're used to thinking about, to consider when we're thinking about how our designs might fail. And a lot of those have to do with users. So one way that we can try to avoid user error is to create instruction manuals. So let's talk about that next. As technical communicators, instruction manuals are one of the most common things that we're going to do in our roles as engineers. It's really important for making our products user-friendly and helping to avoid those user errors. The very first thing we have to do before we write our instruction manual is to analyze our audience. This should be a theme. You've heard me say this a lot when I talked about writing a report. What was the most important thing? Understand your audience. When we talk about designing a product, what's the most important thing? Understanding your stakeholders. Who are we doing these things for? Whether it's designing a product, writing a report, or instruction manual, we need to understand them. We need to understand what their background is, social or educational background. Do they have a technical background? Are they highly educated, or are they 10-year-olds? It all makes a difference in how we write our instruction manual. We need to make sure we use the appropriate vocabulary for their skill level and translate necessary items. So don't use big words or acronyms. And then make sure that we describe the needs and use of our product. There are three main ways that people read instructions. There's three categories. One, people will read all the way through the instructions before doing any of the steps. That's type 1. Type 2 is they're going to read and perform the steps without looking at the next steps. They're going to perform them as they read them. And then 3, there's the people who are going to completely ignore that you have an instruction manual at all and just do it. How many of you in here are type 1? It's not typical. Most people aren't type 1s, even though we've been told over and over we should do type 1. How about type 2? Please? Type 3? Ah, you guys. So you cannot control for type 3 people. They're just going to fail at your instruction manual. So the type 3 people are where you need to try and incorporate things so at least they're not going to harm themselves while doing the task without following the instructions, okay? But what we can design for are type 2 and type 1 people. And in order to do this, we want to make sure that our instructions are in a strict chronological order. because then we cover both of those people. So people who are just going to follow step by step and do the next step, if it's written chronologically, they're not going to mess up. Don't forget, if you have an incorrect audience analysis, this is the biggest reason why our instructions are going to fail. Your language should be clear, concise, and brief, and don't use too long or complex of sentences. Actually, no sentences is even better. So let's do an example. Everybody take out a piece of paper. Take out a piece of paper. Don't talk during this example. I'm going to give you a set of instructions, and you follow those instructions. Go. How many people put a smiley face on their card? So you didn't follow the instructions. What's the problem here?
Order.
It's not following the chronological order like I just talked about, right? So that's what could be the problem. It's just a silly example. You're not being graded on it, but that shows you how important the chronological order is. All right. What goes into your instruction manuals? This is the short version of that. You need a general information at the beginning, then your step-by-step instructions, and then a conclusion. If we look more in depth at these pieces, we need a title, a purpose, a description of the parts, materials, and conditions, steps, conclusion, and any cautions. Let's talk about these each in a little more detail. Our title needs to be specific and accurately name what action is to be done by the instructions. A bad example would be snow removal. It's not very specific. There's a lot of different ways that we can remove snow. What would be a better example would be using your Acme snowblower. So we're describing that we're snow blowing, but we're using our Acme snowblower to do it. So it's more detailed, more specific. Then we need to describe our purpose and audience. In this section, we explain the purpose of our instructions unless it's obvious. So something like a coffee maker, it's obvious that the purpose is to make coffee. But most of the time, it's not just completely obvious. Here's an example. These instructions are for nurses who must inject dye into a vein through a balloon-tipped catheter. It's a very detailed instruction that talks about the who, which is our nurses. So that's our audience. And then what are they doing? They are injecting dye into a vein. And how are they doing it? Through a balloon-tipped catheter. So we have these three main components that we want to include in our purpose statement. Our who, our what, and our how. Here's another example. This Safe Practices book is for employees who operate cranes and riggers. Who's our who? Who's the who in this statement? Who's the audience? Employees. What are they doing? Operating. How? Cranes and riggers. So it's a less clear example, but we have all of these components that go into it. The next section is you'll want to describe the parts, materials, and conditions that you need to do your instructions or to complete your instructions. The materials would be the components that go into it. Things like, do you need sandpaper, paint, glue, those types of materials that might not be included, but they need to go get. Then there are tools. So these are what we call the implements. Do they need a screwdriver? Do they need scissors, a paintbrush? The types of tools that they need to be able to complete it. Then the conditions. And sometimes conditions don't matter for your particular setting, but sometimes they do. So if you're painting, for example, you would want to be in a well-ventilated area. The conditions describe the environment needed to properly complete the instructions. Does it need to be well-ventilated? Does it need to be dry? If you're creating some sort of electronic components, you would want it to be a dry area. Or if you're soldering, there needs to be a fume hood, something like that. Then the big chunk of it is writing the instructions. You'll want to number them. That's the easiest way, or the most common way that people follow things in chronological order, is if there's numbered steps. You want to use the present tense, imperative mode. Don't omit articles. Provide the right amount of information for each step. So not too much, not too little. And then separate your steps from your background info or tips. So everything needs to have a very clear and distinct visual hierarchy or visual layout to separate all of these different things. You want to be specific in your instructions. What's wrong with this instruction? Don't see anything wrong with it? Which dial? Read a dial. Well, there's 6 of them there. Is there one that you want me to read? Well, let's be more specific. I want you to read the top left dial in red. Now you can't mess it up. So being specific helps to prevent error. Ambiguous wording, even if in implied commands, leads to confusion. Even if it's something that you think is obvious, remember, there are old people out there that haven't had the technical savvy know-how for their entire lives like you have. What's wrong with this? Mailing list, what does that mean? I think it's pretty common for those of us who have had email all of our lives, not me, all of your lives, that you would put your email address there. But for those of us who haven't had email or done something like this all of our lives, we don't know if this is our mailing address or our emailing address. Do I put my physical address here, or do I put my email address? Things to think about. All right, here's a set of instructions. Tell me what's wrong with it.
It's not very chronological.
It's not in a good order. Number 3 isn't even an instruction. It's just my opinion. So it's kind of confusing. How about this? Is this better? Take out 2 slices of bread, take out a clean knife, spread the peanut butter on the bread, wash the knife and place the lid back on the peanut butter. It's much clearer than this, where here, like number 4, this isn't even an instruction. It just needs to be washed. Well, that's not instructing me to do anything. It's just making a statement. And this is just an opinion. So in here, I've made it more clear. I've done it step by step, and I've taken that opinion out and just made it a note. It's in its own little separate world. I also put in a picture so it's clear as to what I'm expecting. Although anyone here in 305 or has taken 305, i.e. 305, there's a lot of other stuff that could go wrong here, right? Dr. Opar is very good at making bad peanut butter sandwiches, right? So things like, I told you to put the lid back on, but I never told you to take it off, right? I didn't tell you where to put the peanut butter on the bread, so I could put it out here on the edges, or I could put it on both sides. Lots of other things that could go wrong in this, but it is better than the first. Tell the readers at the end, in your conclusion, what to expect after following your instructions. So describe what they should be seeing or what they should get out of the product. Your food will be hot, but not as brown as if heated in the oven rather than the microwave. A few minutes of standing time will complete the cooking cycle and distribute the heat uniformly. So this helps to the reader to know that they got it right. Organizing and designing the layout and how it looks is actually really, really important. Separating your instructions into logical pieces, logical chunks in that chronological order is helpful and important. You want to make sure you're using relevant instructions and lots of graphics. Graphics are very, very key here. Make the instructions, why is it moving? Make the sections of your instructions visually distinct. So separate pieces, lots of white space, so that a reader can easily find what they're looking for. And then separate and label information that isn't directly part of your instructions. Like that note that I liked Fritos and marshmallows on my peanut butter sandwich, that was just a note, so I separated that away from my instructions. Here's a good example of how to lay that out and make it visually appealing. Lots of white space. I have 2 main sections here that are very distinct from each other. Label, this is nice and big. I can clearly see that if I want to assemble the wheel casters, this is where I go. Or if I want to assemble the outtake flange, this is where I go. Then they are step by step, numbered, and they refer to these figures. These figures are clear, black and white, high contrast. They're numbered, figure 3, 4, 5, 6, and then they're referred to within my instructions. So this instruction says place a lock washer A in figure 4 onto each bolt. So A is pointing to the lock washer, so I can clearly see what I'm referring to within that picture. The last component that you want to also include would be your safety instructions. You want these to be placed in a prominent area on the page so that you can't miss it. And if it's going to be, like if there's a set of instructions that might cause harm, you want the warning to come before that set of instructions, okay? Not after, because then you've defeated the purpose. Remember this chronological thing. People just follow the steps. If it's more critical, you want the font to be larger and even more emphatic than something that's less critical. Here are the different levels of safety that we generally use. Danger would be that there's a likelihood of serious injury or death. A warning is that there's a potential for a minor or moderate injury. Caution, potential for equipment damage. And then a note would be just something that's either suggested or that you like Fritos and marshmallows on your peanut butter sandwich. A note though, there's not a standard. So there's not written standards or some sort of organization out there that says this is what you must follow for safety. And if you're ever working in industry, you should not be the one responsible. There should be some sort of technical communicator or someone. Why is it freaking out? Someone who's in charge of that liability. So remember, know your audience. Keep your instructions simple. Start with an introduction. Use a clear and effective visual hierarchy. Don't skip steps just because they may seem obvious to you, because they might not be obvious to everyone. Conclude with a summary or description. And state the obvious. Just because it's obvious to you doesn't mean that it is obvious to everyone. Then finally, since a lot of the projects that we're doing are for people with disabilities, I want to just briefly talk about how we might accommodate those types of disabilities. So take 2 minutes in your groups and brainstorm ways that you could come up with to help accommodate someone with low vision, a learning disability, or a mobility impairment. 2 minutes. What are ways that we can make our instructions better for people with these disabilities?
High contrast sometimes.
Learning disabilities, video, visual aid, instead of just words. So like mobility, someone in a chair, something like that, maybe have a hard time getting around, walking. So
We started
as a
eating and doing
limp
weird
and a
things.
cane,
Okay,
like even just like a broken leg, like in a wheelchair.
You want me to push the button? Yeah, you can try. This can be nonsense. I'll take the watch if you don't mind. We'll work on it. I'm almost done anyway. All right, what'd you come up with for people with low vision? Bigger font.
Is that audio?
Audio? Yep. One more. Anything else?
Touching you.
What?
Use some helpful touching you.
Oh, tactile cues. I don't have that one, but I like that too. Also high contrast. High contrast helps people with visual impairments see better. What is the best for high contrast? What are the two colors? Black and white. Black and white are the highest contrast possible, so stick to black and white. Oh, learning disabilities. Anyone come up with ideas for people with learning disabilities?
Videos,
Videos,
pictures,
pictures, visual stuff. Audio recordings can also help. So sometimes reading is one of the disabilities that's difficult. Tactile demonstrations can also help people with disabilities or learning disabilities. Videos, and then also incorporating checks throughout. So I talked about having the conclusion where you describe what you should get in the end, but also consider putting that at midway points or after a few instructions, this is what you should be seeing or this is what you should be getting. So there's checks along the way. And then the last one was, what was the last one? Oh, mobility impairments. Any ideas? This one's a little harder. So this one is mostly considering helping them with the setup in the beginning. So making sure that they know everything they need to get ahead of time and how to set it up so that they don't have to go and get things when they're having mobility impairments throughout the process. The last thing we're going to talk about then is the delivery. This is what you need to consider in your delivery review. So checking these things off your list before you deliver your product to your customer. Is the system completely tested for delivery configuration? So have you tested it and you know it's not going to fail or harm anyone? Is the design appropriate and has it been documented appropriately? Is the appearance and construction quality of the project acceptable? What is the number one thing that customers use to determine whether they're going to buy a product? Everyone always says that first. Price is number 3. What's the first or second?
Appearance.
Appearance is number 1. What's number 2 then?
Quality. Size.
I'm not sure. I think I heard it. Maybe not.
Quality.
Quality. So if you're walking down the aisle at Walmart and there's a shelf of the same product, there's 3 or 4 different types of that same product, you're going to grab the one that's prettiest. It's human nature. You don't even know you're doing it. You're going to grab the one that's the prettiest off the shelf. If you take the 2 prettiest, and you feel them in your hands, and one feels like a cheap plastic piece of junk, you're going to put it back and keep the other one. So that's quality. Does it feel like it's a quality build, quality materials? And then the last thing you'll do is pick the one with the best price. That's typically how people select products. So when we give our products to a customer, we do want to make sure that they are visually appealing and something that they're going to want to have at their house or at their work. Identify your safety issues and do a review and address those issues, so your DFMEA. And do you have your manual and troubleshooting guides all complete? And then finally, we also want to have a system so that once we've given it to the customer, we have a way to review it with them in a few months. So contact information, some sort of survey or something where we can gather information and check back with them. That concludes the materials for today. So just